So thank you very much for being with us today. I'm going to share my screen now and go to the presentation. And you should have in the background the title slide, How to Write an Effective Letter of Recommendation for Residency. Elaine's nodding yes, so I know we're on the right track there. Really want to extend my appreciation to you both proximately for spending your time today on this topic, but also ultimately because your role, in addition to precepting our students, has a lasting value if you provide a letter of recommendation for them, or at the very least, extensive clerkship commentary at the end of their time with you. Because as we'll see in a moment, the three-dimensionality and dynamic nature of student doctors at the end of their third year and when you would see them at the beginning of their fourth year gets compressed, flattened out, squeezed quite a bit through the necessary procedure of applying for residency, and very little narrative survives that process. So every word, every other opinion about the student's readiness for residency matters. And in some disciplines, the letter of recommendation is the primary means by which applicants are selected for interview. So I have come over the years to see the critical importance of letters of recommendation for the success of our applicants. And certainly as osteopathic medicine continues to grow, the future of our identity in the state will depend on continued support through this means. You may be aware already, but certainly the students who are in on our session today may not be aware of the components of a residency application. The residency season builds with some amount of stress on the students until application day. And application day is typically in the middle of September. This coming season, it's postponed by 2 weeks until September 29th. And you'll see in the slide that I have it listed as a deadline in quotes. 29 September is actually just the first day that students can apply. But over the years, the nature of the medical student population in the United States is that when applications open, that's when you apply. And if you were to apply, say, on September 30th, well, that would be bad because you would be marked as an applicant who wasn't like the other 32,000 applicants applying for residency who had applied the day before. So there's this almost hysterical spiraling of anxiety and pressure to have everything ready for the opening of the application season. And because of that heightened attention to the components of my life coming together in an application, each of the parts of that application fall under a lot of scrutiny by the students who are preparing them, and I hope in sessions like this, in the development of precepting faculty and how they can be a part of that and be a very positive part of that. I've highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the slide there on the right, the locus of the letters of recommendation. 4 are allowed in the residency application. Most programs are satisfied with 3. We encourage students to submit as many positive letters as they have to the maximum of 4. And unlike the other components in the application, the letters of recommendation do not have to all be ready at the time of the start of the season at the end of September. Some of the most important rotation or clerkships that a student can do en route to residency are those that they're doing in September and October of year 4. And a powerful letter from a residency program experience can make the difference down the line during the application season, even if it wasn't part of the packet when the applications were submitted on September 29th. And you'll see from this array that the only areas where there can be a sort of subjective narrative about the student's readiness would be in the medical student performance evaluation, or the MSPE. That's a templated document that the school produces on behalf of the student. It has very limited areas of narrative dominated by the clinical clerkship commentary that the student receives during year 3 and early year 4. The personal statement, of course, that's the primary means that a program would have to learn about how the student sees themselves maturing into residency, but the jewel of the application is the letter of recommendation from a physician who is therefore a peer to the residency program faculty, and who typically is not beholden, if you will, to the school itself. So the expectation is that if you're writing a letter on behalf of a student, it's because you do want to promote that student, and you're only going to write letters for students you feel strongly about promoting. So it's the one area of the application that the residency program can learn about the student outside of the intrinsically promotional documentation that the school puts together on behalf of that student. Gives it a special identity in the application process, and one in which I know that many physicians could use some guidance on, so that they can provide those letters efficiently, and also in the language and on the competencies that are most important in the perspective of the residency program directors. When I thought about how to bring some information into this presentation, I was reminded how humbling it is to have young adult children in my house. My kids are 16 and 13, and they don't hesitate to call me out when I dad-splain things to them. And they're very quick to say, "Oh, where are you getting that, Dad? What's the evidence for that? You got to back that up with something." And so I thought, that might be effective for writers of letters of recommendation for residency to look at or to see where issues of readiness for residency have been overtly or very objectively stated by the stakeholders themselves. So we have three dimensions on the capacity, the capabilities that residency programs are looking for in students, and I'm going to go over those now, three different dimensions. One is from the residency program directors themselves through a biannual residency program director survey produced by the National National Residency Matching Program, the NRMP. And so when program directors are asked, literally, what do you value the most when ranking a student whom you have interviewed for the match, it's overwhelmingly clear that interpersonal and communication skills equal the match. At this level, the clinical capability, the emotional maturity, self-awareness of most applicants for residency is indistinguishable across the applicant pool, and a good residency environment, a successful longitudinal residency program, is one in which, through the testimony here of program directors, is characterized by effective interpersonal and communication skills. I would speculate, not having been a resident myself, but a lot of this manifestation during residency has to do with the ability of the resident to manage themselves and their situation such that the attending faculty and the residency program director do not have to manage them with additional time. And so the ability to be an effective team member, to be reliable and trustworthy when charged with responsibility, these are all profiles or postures of effective interpersonal and communication skills. It certainly puts a lot of weight in terms of match outcomes on the live interview that students have with programs, because as you can see from this list, that is a momentous event in ranking applicants. Interactions with faculty during the interview and visit, interactions with the house staff during the interview and visit. And I cut the chart off specifically at the point where the first indicator of academic achievement is rated. And hopefully at what I'm imparting here is that while there certainly is a place for board scores in the trajectory of an applicant to their residency match, it's diminutive at this point in terms of getting the match. If board scores dominated the outcome of this process, I think we would call it the achievement instead of the match. So certainly one dimension from the program directors outward about what they're looking for in a successful applicant is teamwork ability, interpersonal ability, communication skills, and anything you can write in that regard on behalf of a student would have a direct meaning to program directors. A second dimension, and one that we've been trying to incorporate into our curriculum at TUCOM, is from a position paper They came out in 2014 through a consortium of academic teaching faculty, residency program directors, and medical schools, captured in this easy to remember title here, the core entrustable professional activities for entering residency. There's a lot loaded into that 2014 position paper. But what residency program directors were saying to the medical education community was, residents need to be ready to go on July 1, and they need to be able to do things effectively on July 1, just as effectively as we need them to do those things at the end of their residency. And yet, because of the handoff between UME and GME, typically a graduating medical student will have been out of the hospital for 90 days on average, and maybe as long as 6 months, depending on your curriculum and when they satisfied their core requirements for graduation. And so if you could help us, the residencies were saying, if you could help us by conditioning your graduates to the entrustabilities that we need them to have locked and ready to go on July 1, that would help our world. And that statement has gotten traction in the medical education community, and like so many other things in medicine, it made for a very facile acronym, EPAs, or Entrustable Professional Activities. And so the 13 competencies or entrustabilities enumerated in this document have become a blueprint for, is your graduating student ready for residency? And without going through the 13 in this presentation, I'll summarize the theme of those capabilities. And they have to do with the ability to know that the person we are matching, as soon as residency starts, can perform live patient care in an unsupervised context and can be relied upon or can be entrusted to do certain things, namely work independently, responsibly. They can learn from day to day as they become more familiar with the scenario, with the cases, with the clinical reasoning and everything else. They're always professional. And very, very importantly, they will seek feedback as part of that adaptive learning nature. And by seeking feedback, what's communicated by this document is we need to know that this resident will ask for help if they don't know what they're doing, as opposed to try to do something independently, and then there's a reaction that has to take place from that. Are they self-aware enough to step out of the room and say, can somebody help me with this? And likewise, when feedback is provided to them, they incorporate it, both critical feedback, constructively critical feedback, and confirmatory or complementary feedback, because residency is about growing continuously in your competency, and the adaptive learner, the entrustable learner, is one who can respond effectively to both the need to improve from what was just experienced and the opportunity to grow from what was just done well. So translating back into your letter of recommendation, comments that you can make about the entrustability of the individual. Are they ready for residency? Can they be unsupervised with patient care now based on the way you're experiencing your interaction with them? Do they ask the right questions? Are they responsive to feedback? And the single word that kind of encompasses this desired trait is teachability. I'm not even sure that's a word, but I've seen it over and over again in clerkship commentaries, and I know that it serves the student well in their medical student performance evaluation to be depicted by their teaching physicians as teachable. The third dimension of sort of information not created by me to convey values of the letter of recommendation comes from emergency medicine. Unlike other residency disciplines, emergency medicine broke out and said, in this array of information that we need to see in order to pick students to interview and then rank for the match, we don't want to leave it up to you to write to us about the things we need to know about the applicant. So we're going to create a standard letter of evaluation. It used to be called the standard letter of recommendation, or the SLOR. Now it's the SLOE, S-L-O-E. And emergency medicine has been very explicit about the value of the standard letter of evaluation. Namely, if I could go back to that histogram chart, it would be the number one criterion for choosing a student to interview, and they leave nothing up to the discretion of the letter writer in this case, because it's a form. It's a form that only, in this case for emergency medicine, only emergency medicine faculty can complete, and that you are directed to address these very specific issues: commitment to the specialty, work ethic, willingness to assume responsibility. As you might expect, also clinical reasoning skills, always nice to have affirmation of acumen there. Critically, the ability to work with others. And it was nice for me to see, I wasn't really expecting it, I can't say why, but wasn't really expecting there to be such an emphasis on empathy. I think the exact phrasing in the SLOE is, this person imparts a caring nature to patients and families. And so this could be a blueprint for your own letter of recommendation, because in the broader landscape of residency matching, emergency medicine is respected for creating workflows, creating forms, creating processes that other residency disciplines seek to emulate. So if there's a predetermined sort of key point list for a letter of recommendation, it would be the things that the SLOE asks every letter writer to rate. They don't even ask you to narrate on these. They give you these prompts and say, rate the student on these capabilities. If I could combine those three dimensions of expressions of interest by residencies in terms of what they're looking for in applicants, I would mock it up, if you will, as a sort of Michelin star LOR. And some of the characteristics of this would be that, as written on the right-hand side of the screen there, we're all very busy, we're overcommitted, and residencies receive hundreds of applications all on the same day. They're looking, typically, they're looking to reduce that applicant pool by a factor of 10. If they receive 900 applications for the residency program, they're typically going to interview about 90 to 100 people. And so how to get from that nationwide drop of 1,000 applicants to 100 to interview, you're not reading 1,000 residency applications from front to back. Chances are you're filtering or sorting or marking, as we might say, for characteristics that you know will indicate a strong application overall. And if you're going to go to the LOR at the deciding to interview this person stage, it would benefit the student if the letter that you provide is concise, but also exuding confidence. So I think it can be tempting to write a very long letter as its own kind of visual. Look, the length of this letter reflects the time that I'm spending committed to this student that I'm never getting back, and that I have to squeeze into my day aside from all the other overcommitments that I have. That could be an effective statement also, but if you want your comments to be read in full, concise is a good target there. What I've learned from our students is that some of them are very dedicated to specific specialty and are not applying to any other field. And so they want to really accelerate their identity for the match in that profession by having their letter writers also say, in addition to being teachable, responsible, professional, etc., they're a perfect fit for obstetrics and gynecology, or a perfect fit for psychiatry. Other students are making an application plan that involves a secondary or a backup outcome in the event that they don't match to their preferred specialty. And since it's time intensive to ask for, and time intensive on your part to provide multiple letters of recommendation for a student, the preference would be that the letter simply addresses their readiness for residency without identifying the specific specialty that they're applying to, because they might want to use that letter for their primary choice, OBGYN, but also their secondary choice, maybe internal medicine or family. So if you have an opportunity to dialogue with the student who's asking you for the letter, you may want to ask for their direction on whether they would like you to address their fit to specialty or not. And I've seen over the years, and thank you for your generosity of time, I've seen preceptors provide multiple letters as well. Here's the letter that specifies your professional interest, and here's the letter that you can use in your other applications as well. A common thing that I see both at the application to get into medical school side where I work and also in the residency letter of recommendation side is that there's a temptation to acknowledge the outstanding status of the student by repeating some information about their leadership back on campus or other achievements in the letter of recommendation. I would caution against this because the LOR is unique in being a channel for peer-to-peer communication about those intangible skills, those observations that say, dear residency program director, this person is entrustable, they're professional, that you will be pleased that you interviewed this student, and trust that there are other parts of the application instrument that allow for a full visibility of the candidate's CV, if you will. So in Elaine Ho's case, it would be great to mention that Elaine was also Student Doctor of the Year in your letter of recommendation, but we're able to do that in the medical student performance evaluation quite clearly. And so by keeping your comments toward the interactive nature of your relationship with the student who's applying, you can keep your letter concise and also focused on the things that can't appear anywhere else in the application. I've seen, and this is my subjective sense of what really moves me when I see what I feel to be a quite earnest letter of recommendation coming for a student, is when somebody says that they would be very happy to have this person back in their practice when they finish training, and or they would trust them to care for their children. I think that's not a lightly offered comment. And so if you feel that way, just subjectively, I think that can add a very personal touch to the letter of recommendation that says this person is somebody you need to interview. We work in various capacities. There's a very distributed nature of professional healthcare out there. And so not everybody has letterhead, the old-fashioned trimming, if you will, of the sheet of paper that I've always had access to in academics because universities have letterheads, but not all medical practices do, not all hospitals do. And even residency programs I've seen at major universities don't always have readily accessible banner and sort of marquee information about the substrate upon which this letter is based, the experience that the student had with the framing of people and facility that a letterhead imparts. If you have letterhead, absolutely use it. Fortunately, I think the letter of recommendation phenomenon is casual enough that what matters most is the information in the letter, and there's a lot of respect for the time that it takes to write these letters and therefore the exigencies that might need to be used in order to get the letter out. So there certainly is no penalty for a letter that goes out on plain white paper digitally, but to the extent that you can put your letterhead around it, I think that's a great pro tip for optimizing the value of the letter that you're putting out for the student. Another thing that I have found is regarded as a sort of reflection of, yes, I write letters for many students. I'm certainly not going to write a critical letter. And so how do you know, residency program director, that the letter I'm writing for this student is genuine to the extent that it's genuine beyond the basic letter that I might write saying professional student, responsible, teachable. That's my general endorsement, safe investment for residency, versus this student is all that in a bag of chips. This student has more than what I'm typically experiencing in my role in medical education. Time is, in my experience in medical education and with physicians, time is an irreplaceable currency. You can't make more of it. And certainly my attempts to find email contact and direct phone line contact for physicians usually result in nothing. And so embedding that direct phone line and that behind the front of office email contact for yourself is a way of revealing, you can reach me on this person. I know you won't, because we have a professional courtesy that says my time is super valuable and so is yours. But in case you had any doubt about whether I'm being real in my letter, about the capabilities of this student, you can call me, you can email me, because this is my reveal that it's real. Not that letters would be perceived as boilerplate or cut and paste if they don't have that information, but it's one of those things that adds, in my opinion, adds that other level of impact to a letter when you say, I'm available on this if you ever want to talk to me and get some more detail. In the arena of frequently asked questions, or are there etiquettes or conventions for letters of recommendation? These are some things that come across my desk quite a bit during that season of the year. It seems pro forma that students, when they're establishing the platform in the application portal where you can submit your letter, seems pro forma that they check the box that says they waive the access to the letter. I've seen cases in which students did not check that box, but they didn't check it because they didn't see it. They didn't check it because it just didn't come into their moment as they were getting everything ready. It's not that they left the box open because they wanted to have access to the letter and read it. But you should, and therefore you should expect that if a student asks you to provide a letter of recommendation, that when you get the invitation from the application service to do that, there is an indication that the student has waived their access to the letter. And if it indicates the other, if it indicates the student has not waived their access to the letter, I invite you to communicate with the student and ask them if that was something that they meant to do. The history of residency applications prior to 2016 was that medical schools were the relay chain for letters up to the application service. Preceptors would write letters, send them to the medical school. The medical school would attach them to the applications of each student going forward. Naturally, and I will neither deny nor confirm this for myself, but certainly it was the case that we would read the letters. And if a student had 6 letters of recommendation to choose from, they're limited to 4 in the application, we might say, Elaine, it would be great if you submitted the letters from X, Y, and Z and A, and we might just passively not include the letters from J and K when we mentioned that. And of course, this is skirting the boundary of what that waiver really means. And so that landscape got cleaned up a little bit in 2016, and the application service said medical schools can no longer handle the letters of recommendation. We know your temptation to promote your students and help them build the strongest application possible, but the waiver's the waiver, and you're not part of that waiver. And so now letters of recommendation since 2016 can only make it into the student's application if they're uploaded by you. Or a person that you designate to do the uploading for you. Technically, I don't think this is a very complicated process, but it does involve another one of those logins and et cetera, that we're flooded with today. An important consideration here is that the person you designate to upload the letter, if you're not uploading it yourself, cannot be someone back at the medical school who facilitates the students matching to a residency. So if you're affiliated with a medical school, it makes perfect sense. Someone who supports my department at the medical school can upload this letter. That's all good. What you couldn't do, for example, is send the letter to me. And I can't upload it because I have a login access to ERAS, the application service that identifies me as a designated official. And so I'm the one who's specifically barred from being able to see letters of recommendation. And so this adds a level of complication to the process. And so in this presentation, I'm putting it in here as an invitation to ask for help if you need help with the uploading of the letter. I can't do it for you, but I can certainly point you to where you can read the most concise information about how to do it. I think the third bullet point sort of goes without further commentary. The letters are special. The letters have value, and I think it can be socially and professionally awkward when a student asks you to write a letter to say, I don't think so. You're good, but you're not letter worthy. And that might be how you feel. about your experience with the student. I encourage you to, of course, professionally, but very directly, thank the student for the consideration and say that you're not able to provide a letter at this time. Because I think far worse than no letter is a letter that is clearly tepid, is clearly uncommitted, or non-committal, or is outright critical. Certainly, if you have concerns about the readiness of a student to proceed to GME, the channel for that feedback, which is very important feedback, is to that student's medical school, certainly, and not in the letter of recommendation. We already addressed the fourth bullet point there. And the fifth one is really just a housekeeping issue. Some people are more particular than others about the details of, is the pronoun the right gender pronoun? If I'm using a letter form that's efficient for me and I'm cutting and pasting the last name that I used when I wrote this letter last year with this year's student's name, did I actually paste in all the right places? You may not be amazed, I was amazed at how frequently, prior to 2016, when we trafficked all the letters, I was stunned at how many letters had 2 or 3 people's names in them because the pasting was incomplete. And that revealed that the letter being sent to the residency program was a letter that I haven't personalized my commentary for. So that little slip, although just a proofreading error, revealed a whole other thing about the oomph of the letter. And then to the extent that you know of yourself and of your peers, the reaction that people have to these kinds of errors. For some people, it's not a big deal at all. I'm looking for the information in the letter and the beautification of it, doesn't matter to me. But other people see that attention to detail as a reflection of maybe not sincerity in the letter, but certainly the time spent doing the best job possible. And so I encourage, as a rule of the road for effective letters of recommendation, to give it a good proofread, at the very least, to make sure that the name in the letter is the name of the student that you are trying to promote for residency. There are many other resources that you can tap into if you are at a moment when you want to write a letter of recommendation but are looking for some tips. I just innocently put residency LOR template into Google, and I think I had 131,000 hits on that. So others have been to this juncture and have codified what they believe to be an effective letter of recommendation as well. I think technically, and one of the biggest hazards when that deadline is approaching, it's coming into mid-September, the student's very anxious. I asked X and Y and Z for a letter 3-4 weeks ago, a couple months ago. I don't have the letter yet. They said they were going to do it. There's that point at which everybody's hustling to get it done, and then you are reminded harshly that there's a sequence of steps you have to go through after you've written the letter just to get it up into the application service. So just be aware that that's a part of the process, and there are guidelines for this that you might equip yourself with in advance and put it in that place where you know you can get to easily when the time comes that you have to upload the letter. And of course, the OPSC membership, anybody is more than welcome, even if it's not our student that you're writing a letter for. If you need some advice or some guidance on this, you're more than welcome to contact me. Anything that helps the promotion of our osteopathic medical students in California, whether they're from Western or the new school in Clovis or ours, is helpful to everybody. So I'm very willing to be available and responsive to you if that can make a difference. I want to thank you again so much for the time and the earnest desire to help our students. It's something that I have the privilege of, a niche that I work in on a regular basis at TUCOM. It's the defining value of my professional life, and I know what it costs to be completely devoted professionally to live patient care, to the delivery of healthcare in the community, and then have to do some of this academic work on the other side. So thank you for your time on that, for supporting our students, and for today too. Thanks for joining our session.